The quality of a decision is determined by the quality of the information you have and the courage to act on it. Theodore Roosevelt, 26th U.S. President. All right, good morning. Welcome. We're back with another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, 4-day weekend for me. Not going to lie, I enjoyed the heck out of it. Like I literally did just about nothing when it comes to like my work, the company. Well, technically, I only had 3 days for them. I was working yesterday while traveling, but otherwise, I had a 4-day weekend. No yard work, no podcast. I wasn't really on social media that much, not as much as compared to I normally am. I spent a lot of time with the family. We enjoyed. I had a lot of fun. Um, and here, look, I'll give you a story of what happened. It was funny. Uh, so we went up to Asheville, North Carolina for a friend's wedding. And my wife is out traveling. I told you guys that last week. She's been out traveling. She's visiting a bunch of different friends. She's like, "Oh, I'll take this opportunity to go here, and then I'll travel over here, and I'll stop and meet these friends." And she initially invited me, but I was like, "Man, I got a podcast, I got to work, I got all these things." I was like, "I don't know." So we compromised, and I just did this one weekend. So while we're up in Asheville, we hook up with some friends, and they're like that live there, and they're like, "Hey, have you seen this pinball arcade place?" And I was like, "No, I haven't. I've not heard about this." And so they were talking it up, and we're like, "Oh, let's go there." So what it is, they have like all these pinball machines, and then like another room, they have all these arcade games, and they're all old. Like there's nothing new. I'm not even sure if they create new arcade games anymore. And so these are the ones that I would have played growing up. Like when I went to like say the Dayton Boys and Girls Club in Dayton, Ohio. I went there and they had like a little arcade room and you could pay like a certain amount of money and you got like an X on your hand that meant you could go in and out all day long while you were there. And then, maybe you didn't have that, that kind of cash. And so maybe you only had half that. So then you could pay for like half the day and you could go in between a certain time and a certain time and you got a different mark on your hand and and you could just play the games, or you could go to an actual arcade, and if you had plenty of quarters, then you could play, for however long you could play. So you either learned how to be good at the games or you learned how to spend a lot of money. It was one of the two choices. So I'm like, yeah, let's take my son there. So we go there and we're playing some of the games, um, and some of the games are hard because he's not played them before. He doesn't understand, like especially the ones with the roller ball. So we get over and I see that there's Mortal Kombat, and I'm like, "Oh, I remember that game." Now he's 6, and I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, it's like it was a big deal when I first got to that game. Like, wow, look at all this blood, and I'm like, "Ah." It's like, let's just play. So he's kicking my butt, and he's trash talking me, like not in a negative way. He's not like, he's not using profanity or anything like that. He's just like, "Yeah, I got you, Dad," and I'm like trying to play it. I'm trying. I think we played like 4 or 5 games, and he just kicked my butt in every one of them. So I was like, "All right, son." I was like, "Over here, Street Fighter 2. I was like, you want to play this game?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we'll play this game." And so we go over there, and I broke out Chun Li. You know what I'm saying? If you're old like me and you play this game, you know what's up. And I just whooped on him. I was like, bam, bam, bam. Now you might be like, "DL, it's a 6-year old." I had to regain, my dignity. Okay, I can't go out like that, on a game that's like basically my game to a 6-year old. This is not working. He still beat me at Mortal Kombat, so whatever. Luckily, he doesn't know the game, so he wasn't able to employ any of the finish him moves. Like, "Well, I'll show you, Dad. Let me rip your head off," or something crazy. So that it was a lot of fun. I got to enjoy taking him to the arcade, enjoy playing with him. We went to some different restaurants. Obviously went to our friend's wedding. Uh, he got to go and chase lightning bugs for the first time, so that was really cool. So it was a lot of fun. We enjoyed different restaurants, hanging out with some friends. Did some, I wouldn't call it hiking, but we went to some places where you could, check out some of the outdoor stuff. So it was really cool. But I'm glad to be back, and hopefully you're glad to see me. And let's get into this. So oh well, before we get into it, let me give you my announcements here. So tonight, yes, we're going to be streaming tonight, not tomorrow night, but Thursday night. So you'll see an episode today, tomorrow morning, and Thursday morning. That's going to wrap up the month of July. And then we're going to stream tonight, and then we're going to stream tomorrow night. I'm sorry, Thursday night. Tonight and Thursday night, I'm going to do a bill review. I'm going to open with the bill review, and then I'm going to shift into Mom Donnie. Okay. When I shift into Mom Donnie, that's gonna be the Rumble, that's gonna be for Rumble's, premium members. So you'll be able to watch part of the show freely, publicly, but then I'm gonna shift over, okay? And I wanna do that because I wanna try to get as many people to be able to watch the show as possible. Now, where are we? If you're following the channel, we're trying to grow, we're trying to stay, in this game for the creator program. Where are we? We're good on all metrics. Could use a bump for chatters this month. I'm gonna be talking to some friends, but I'm gonna beg. I'm gonna be like, "Yo, create an account on Rumble and just come drop in and say hi, please." Right? I'm going to do that. So if you're watching from Rumble and you happen to have an account and you've not, like, you haven't made any comments, do me a favor and just say hi. Or if you've got a question or a criticism or whatever, throw that in the chat. Now, this is explicit to the Rumble folk. Like if you're on YouTube and you want to chat, that's great. I'm not telling you not to. I'm just kind of like making a plea to those in Rumble to do so that we hit all of our metrics and I can continue on in the Rumble Creator Program. They leveled it up and I'm going to meet the challenge to the best of my ability and we're just going to keep growing. So do me that quick favor, folks. All right, let's get into this. So I was initially going to do a bill review in the morning, but I kind of underestimated just how much I would want to continue relaxing after riding home for 6 hours and working yesterday. And so when I got home, I had to like unpack and kind of, check in on my mother-in-law and all this other stuff. So there wasn't really a lot of time to kind of start prepping last night. And so I saw something posted on social media and I thought that will make a great topic because I'm seeing it a lot. So you may have seen this image, and I'll describe it to you if you're not, if you've got the phone or the your device to the side and you're not looking at the screen. So this is an airplane. It's full of bullet holes, across the kind of like right behind the cockpit, and then on the outer edges of the wings, and then on the tail. And so the story behind this image is that during World War II, the US military were analyzing bullet holes on the returning bombers so that they could determine where to add armor because they were like, all right, let's get these armored up so that, they can do better. Right now we have some data to work with. And they noticed that most of the bullet holes were on the fuselage, the wings and tail, as you can see here. And so that was their plan. They were like, all right, we're going to reinforce those areas because that's where the bullet holes are, right? However, a certain clever statistician, Abraham Ward, he noticed that, hey, there's a flaw here. The data only includes planes that survived and returned. Planes hit in critical areas like the engines or the cockpit, they likely didn't make it back, explaining the lack of bullet holes in those areas on returning aircraft. So in other words, he's like, look, we don't have all the data we need here, but we do. We have the planes returning and we know where they can be hit and still potentially return. What we don't know is, hey, where do they get hit and they don't return? Well, we can make an assessment based on what we have. It's the opposite. Assume that the bullet holes are in the places. So on this particular picture, assume the bullet holes are in the areas where they're white, right? Where there's no red dots. Okay. And so what he did was he recommended, hey, why don't we add armor to those areas? It's counterintuitive, but why don't we add armor to those areas where there's fewer or no bullet holes, such as the engines, since those are likely the critical spots that when they get hit, they cause the plane to be lost. And this was counterintuitive, right? Because you're like, look, we can see where the bullet holes are, but he recognized that there was missing data on the down planes, and so this recognition helped improve aircraft survivability, and it became this classic example of what we call survivorship bias. So what is survivorship bias? Well, I'll give you a great example here. So here is, let's see here. Let's go back here. Oops. Let's go back. There we go. So here's a common comment that I see all the time. Say, and this one goes, so nothing really happened to those people who refused to take COVID-19 vaccine. Right. And this is this big argument. And you see it in various ways. Like people say, like, oh, well, you know, nobody regrets not taking it. And then they compare them to some of the people that we see that do regret taking it. And then there are people who got the vaccine and they don't regret taking it. And so it's like this big debate, like, should I have taken it? Should I have not? And so people are kind of using these outcomes to determine whether or not it was a good idea. And so then in response to comments like these, you'll see comments like this. And so this person, he comes across and comes across the post and he says, finally, the perfect time to use this meme. Now, I would first argue, just if we're nitpicking, which is what us libertarians like to do, wouldn't really call this a meme so much as just like a picture kind of illustrating, what happened in World War II. Like I know I'm nitpicking here, but I wouldn't really call it a meme per se. But it's being used as a meme to kind of counter. And what he's basically saying is the person before him, this person is engaging in survivorship bias. In other words, it's like, hey, I didn't take the COVID vaccine. I'm still here. I haven't had any negative outcomes. So therefore, I made a good decision. And everybody else should have made the same decision as me. That is effectively a form of resulting. Now, I've talked about resulting on this show before. It's an idea that I came across while listening to Annie Duke. She's a former poker player. She's also a cognitive. I'm going to get this wrong, but I think she's like a cognitive science. No, she discusses and studies decision making at the cognitive level. There's a particular term for it, and I probably should have grabbed it, but I didn't. So anyway, here, listen to her talk about this idea of resulting. And I played this clip before, but it's worth playing again. So here we go.
What resulting is using the outcome quality as a perfect signal for deriving decision quality. So let me give you an example. It's 2015. People will remember the Super Bowl, the Seahawks against the Patriots. And the Seahawks are on the 1 yard line. There's 26 seconds left. It's second down, and they have one timeout. And I think that people will remember that, and they're down by 4, by the way. People will remember that famously, Pete Carroll called a pass play. Russell Wilson passed the ball. It was intercepted. And the next day, the headlines were, let's just say, pretty bad for Pete Carroll. So they were, worst play in Super Bowl history. Pete Carroll's, I think some of them called him an idiot. But headline after headline after headline after headline was about how completely ridiculous this call was. Now, there were a couple of outlying voices. One of the main ones was a guy named Benjamin Morris over at 538, and he went through some of the analytics on the play and actually had very, very good arguments for why that was, at worst, reasonably thought through and possibly quite a brilliant play if you were just thinking statistically. It's easy to see what's happening here, right? Because all you have to do is the thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this. Pete Carroll calls the pass. Russell Wilson throws it, and it's caught in the end zone for a touchdown. And just take a minute and think about what those headlines would have been the next day. Instead of worst play in Super Bowl history, they would have been Carroll outsmarts Belichick. It would have been about his creativity. This is the kind of thinking that got him to the Super Bowl in the first place. This is why he's the best coach in the NFL and deserves that ring. Now, obviously, whether the ball is caught or dropped does not actually change whether the decision was a good one. But we act like it does. And that's what resulting is.
All right. So if you're like me, you're not really good with sports analogies because I don't know any of those people. I mean, I know the names, but I don't really know. Like I didn't watch this Super Bowl, that particular Super Bowl. Or if I did, I don't remember it. I might have, sometimes I get invited to like a Super Bowl party and I go and I just chat and I kind of like will occasionally look at the screen, but I really have no idea what's going on. In fact, half the time, I don't even realize that it's Super Bowl time until like the week before when people are like, dude, you watching the Super Bowl this weekend? And I'm like, oh, is it this weekend? I am notoriously bad when it comes to sports analogies. And so if you ever hear me make one, just get ready to laugh because I'll probably butcher it. So let me convert this into something that's a little bit less sports oriented for those of you who may not be into sports like me, and maybe it'll make this, easier to understand or just give you another example to work with. So imagine you go out and you're at you have a friend that lives along a lake or a river, and they have this like area where you can go swimming, and you're like, all right, let's go out there. We're gonna have some beers. We're gonna drink. We're gonna swim. Have a little bit of fun, right? Sounds like something normal people do, right? You just go out. You go to the edge of the water and you set up, and maybe you grill out. You're having some good time, right? And so somebody says later, hey, man, you shouldn't have been drinking that much and swimming. It's bad for you. And imagine somebody goes, oh, yeah, well, I got practically smashed and I went swimming and here I am. So therefore, it wasn't a bad idea, right? What they're telling you is their decision to go swimming and drink and continually drink was a good decision because they didn't get hurt. And this is resulting. The idea that you determine, well, is this a good decision or was that a good decision? Well, what happened? Well, okay, if nothing bad happened, then it was a good decision. But if something good happened, then, or I'm sorry, if something bad happened, then it was a bad decision. right? Like, so that's how people frequently will make decisions. And that's wrong. That's called resulting. That doesn't tell you about the quality of your actual decision. Like what were the circumstances? What led you to believe this would be a good idea, or a bad idea, like whatever decision that you're making. So let's bring this to COVID because we're allowed to talk about it now, and I don't think I'm going to have any problems with my YouTube channel, as many people experienced back in, say 2020 to roughly around 2023. Anytime you talked about COVID, you got in trouble. So let's bring this to COVID, okay? Because because the interesting thing is, like, a lot of people want to, they basically are resulting. They're like, hey, I didn't take the vaccine, and look, here I am. I'm not hospitalized. I didn't die. I never even got sick. So therefore, I made the right decision. But that's incorrect. It's also incorrect to say I took the vaccine and I suffered no negative results. So therefore, my decision was correct. Both of those are equally wrong. So I want to show you this next video, and I'm actually going to move myself out of it because this is a video of me. This is the video that I made back in 2021 in October. So we're like practically almost dead middle of the pandemic. And so I want you to watch this video because this will kind of give you insight into the evidence and the information that we had during the pandemic and kind of roughly when we had it. Now, this is a video I made after the fact. So, like, think about all this information that I'm discussing has been present prior, right? Like, so like, this information was available before even October 2021. So let's play that video real quick. And let me set this up so that I'm not in the video because it would be weird to have that little me while big me is talking. So we'll play this. And the video is only about 2 minutes.
The Cato Institute recently published an article titled Make the Unvaccinated Pay Their Own Way. Sounds free market, right? Even libertarian? There are problems. The article compares the hospitalization of an unvaccinated man at an estimated cost of $3 million to what might only have been about $40 had he been vaccinated. It then points to the Kaiser Family Foundation, who reported that during August of 2021, unvaccinated adults drove $3.7 billion in medical costs. The article's point: the unvaccinated should pay for risk taking. Here's what Cato conveniently leaves out. The CDC reports that in 2017, the total estimated cost of diagnosed diabetes was $237 billion, while obesity averages $147 billion annually. Compare that to the $3.7 billion from August, which would total $42 billion annually. There's more. In July, the CDC reported between March 2020 and March 2021, 94.9% of over 540,000 patients identified with COVID had one underlying medical condition. That same report stated the strongest risk factors for death were obesity, anxiety disorders, and diabetes. In the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report for March of this year, of over 148,000 hospitalized patients with COVID between March and December of 2020, 78% had a BMI of 25 or higher. This is not to demonize people with medical conditions or those with extra weight. When the unvaccinated are blamed for causing unnecessary medical costs, it's worth pointing out the same preventable conditions play a major role in existing costs in the healthcare system and one's risk of hospitalization from COVID-19. I will demonize Cato for intellectual malice by selectively presenting information as if vaccination choices should be treated differently than other choices. Paying for your choices in the free market is a very libertarian idea. Selectively defending one behavior over others is not. That's all for today. Stay safe and guard your liberty.
Okay. So now the gist of that video was more about pushing back on some ideas regarding how do we treat people that are unvaccinated. But within that, you'll notice that I said, like, hey, obesity and diabetes were known in 2021 to cause, if you had those, it was understood and it was already known that those things contributed to worse outcomes for people that got COVID, that came down with COVID. Okay. Now, when it comes to, I've always been very open about my particular vaccine status. And that's because, I'm a talking head, if you will. And so these are the kind of things that I talk about. But I made the decision that, hey, you know what? I don't really need to be vaccinated. Why did I make that decision? Well, in Italy, in March of 2020, they got hit by COVID hard. And then we had the data after the fact. Like we could look through, we could see like who got hit. And I was reviewing the data. In fact, in 2020, I think I was reviewing COVID information on like a weekly, sometimes even daily basis. I was getting out and I was pulling information down. I was checking it out, analyzing. I was like, who's succumbing to this? Who's getting hospitalized? Who are the people that are dying from this? Because I was very curious about it. And there was all kind of misinformation. And so I was pulling information from like CDC and other places. This information was just simply reports of who is dying. Now I know that there's a lot of question about like how were hospitals, tracking deaths where, if you got into a car wreck and you came in and they tested you for COVID, did they mark you as dying from COVID? Set that aside for a moment. I just simply looked and said, okay, when Italy got hit hard, I looked at the information and I said, wow, it looks like people that had comorbidities were hit the hardest. And it looks like people that were very old were also hit the hardest. But then it also, what I could tell is like, hmm, looks like you've got a lot of people my age and younger who are not getting hit very hard. It's not to say that nobody was hit hard by COVID or even died from COVID. That's just to say that it was very clear to me that me as a relatively healthy individual, okay, like I don't have, you could see, I don't, I'm not overweight, maybe underweight according to some people, and I don't have diabetes. Blood pressure was another one that wasn't in this particular report that I was reviewing. But if you had looked at evidence elsewhere, they also said that if you had high blood pressure, that was a problem for you as well when it comes to getting COVID and your outcome. So I looked and I said, okay, well, I don't have diabetes. I'm not overweight. I don't have high blood pressure. I'm not old. Right? I'm 47. I mean, I say that I'm old, but my mother-in-law likes to remind me, you're not old because she's 81. I'm like, I'm old now. I can't get up on my back. And she's like, really? She's like, you don't even know what old is yet. So, so at the end of the day, I made my decision based on what is my risk based on what I'm seeing from the evidence come out. That is a good decision, right? Like I'm making it based on the information available to me. Now, the vaccine itself came out in December of 2020. So there was time between when Italy got hit hard, getting the information out, and then the start of the vaccine. And I believe when the vaccine first came out, if I remember correctly, in December of 2020, we were trying to get it to the people that were at most risk. And so we understood, we may not have been talking about it, but we understood there were some people that were more at risk than others. And, the conversation gets really muddied from there because, then you started talking about like herd immunity and all these other things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I made my decision based on, okay, the data says, based on what I'm seeing, I'm not one of those at most risk. And I don't make any medical decisions based on, okay, how's it going to work with somebody else? Like I don't say I'm going to get this vaccine so that I can potentially save somebody else. Yeah, that's not how I operate because in the libertarian world, well, you could make that decision, but it's more likely that you're going to expect someone to make that decision based on how it impacts them. That's how a libertarian world would generally operate with the understanding that you really could make a decision for any reason that you wanted. So you could say, "Hey, I am not at risk, but I work in a nursing home. So therefore, since I work around people who are at high risk, perhaps I should take the vaccine." And you base your risk, you know, on what we understand of the vaccine at the time. Okay. So at the end of the day, resulting is making a decision based on the information that you have available. I'm sorry. Resulting is making a decision based on the outcome. What you want to do is you want to make a decision based on the available information at the time. This will allow you to look back and say, yes, I made a good decision, right? Based on, the information. When you look back and you go, okay, what information did I have? What information did I not have? And then you can separate that. I can look back. So for instance, I can look back and I can say, well, in October of 2021, there wasn't a lot of information on long-term effects from the vaccine. There's more information on longer term effects today in 2025. Now, again, you have to say, okay, well, what is the information like 10 years later? Well, we're not there yet. We don't have that information. So right now, if you look at it, the vaccine came out in December of 2020. We're 5 years later. We're just about 5 years later, just under 5 years, right? About 4.5 years later. Well, you have 4.5 years of information. It's kind of varied, but you got roughly 4.5 years worth of information that you can make a decision today, right? And so as time goes on, you get more and more information. So then when you look back, you say, okay, based on the information that I had at that moment, separating out new information that came out later, was that decision a good decision? Right? Why did I make that decision? And I'll tell you, Annie Duke wrote a whole book about it. It's called Thinking in Bets. What was the rest of it? It's a long title, but it's basically, look it up, Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets. Now you might say, well, who is Annie Duke, to have, to talk about this kind of stuff? She's not only a poker player, but she actually started out in academia where she was very interested in and studying human decision making. So not only does she have the academic background for this and the research, but she's also got making decisions in poker where you have some information available to you, but some information that you don't. So for instance, you might know, okay, based on the cards that you have, based on the cards that are facing up on the table. Okay, so those cards are already used. They're already out there. You don't know what other cards somebody else has. You don't know what cards may be coming next. You don't know which cards, I mean, you know which of the group, which cards are available, but you don't know which one you can expect, right? You don't know which one's the one that's going to, when you say hit me and they give you another card, you have no knowledge of what that card is until you get it. Okay. So poker, as it turns out, is a great way to identify your decision making process if you'll allow it. Or you could just go, I won lots of money, so therefore all of my decisions were good. And it's funny because Annie Duke talks about that. She says one of the things that she realized is that early on in her career, she would always kind of like review the tapes and she would go back and say, okay, you know, how was my decision at this particular point in the game? And she realized that there were points in the game where she was making bad decisions, even though she might have won a hand, because she would be like, oh, I made this decision on not on information, but on maybe on a gut feeling or maybe on the emotion that she was having at the time. And if you watch videos about her, she'll tell you that poker is this really, really great way to identify decision making skills because there are so many things coming at you. She said, not only do you have the knowns and the unknowns, but you also have this degree of emotion that gets to you because you're losing money, you're winning money. So this emotion gets in there. It's kind of like, oh, I'm hot. I got to keep going. And then that person, they keep going and then, they don't get out while the getting's good. And then they end up losing all the money, right? Like there's a certain point where you're not making a decision based on evidence, based on rationality, that you're making a decision based on how you feel. And I think a lot of people did that during COVID on both sides. And then today, they're still doing it. So you'll have people come out and they'll say, well, I didn't get the COVID vaccine. Nothing happened to me. I didn't even, get a slight cough. So therefore, I made a good decision. Then you have other people who will come out and say, well, I took the COVID vaccine. You guys said that I was going to get turbo cancer and, die of a heart attack. And yet here I am, healthy as a horse. Right. And so both of them are incorrect. That is not how you evaluate whether or not your decision was good. That is resulting. And it's funny because you're having all these debates, and a lot of the debates are really just my bad way of evaluating the past versus your bad way of evaluating the past. When people ask me that, if I were to talk about my decision to not get vaccinated, I will tell you, I looked at the evidence available to me at the time. And I said, all right, based on my medical history, based on where I was, not having any of those comorbidities, being relatively young, I was only like in my, early 40s. Okay. So I looked at it and I said, the evidence says I don't need to be vaccinated, that I will likely survive even if I get COVID. Right. So if I get infected by what, SARS-CoV-2, is that what it was? So when I look back, I can look back and I can safely say my decision was a good decision, because based on the evidence, like, would I make that decision today with the knowledge that I have today? Right. And I would say yes, because the evidence, number one, most importantly, the evidence at the time was good evidence. It was good rationale to use. And then today, it's only been confirmed at this point. Like, we're not going back and saying, "Oh, as it turns out, old people weren't the only ones at risk." Nope, we realize, hey, actually, they were the only people at risk in terms of age-wise, right? As you got younger, your risk diminished. And we get to where, like, if you were in your teens or your early 20s, you were actually at some of the lowest risk by age. By now, again, if you had some other comorbidity, if you were obese, if you had a BMI of like 26, if you had high blood pressure, if you had diabetes, if you had all three, you were really at risk. And if you said based on that, I'm going to go and get the vaccine, you made a good decision. If you said, well, I'm getting the COVID vaccine because the doctor said so, I wouldn't call that a good decision. That doesn't mean you didn't have a good outcome. That just means you didn't really make a good decision, or you didn't use the information available to you. Now, you could argue and say, well, a lot of people just go by what their doctors say. That's fair. And in that sense, you could say, well, it wasn't a bad decision, right? You go to your doctor and you say, "Hey doc, I've been having some heartburn," and you lay out all the details, and then the doctor makes an assessment and they say, "Okay, well, I think you need to take this medication, or maybe we need to go and have a procedure to see what's going on," so on and so forth, right? And you're not going to evaluate necessarily every single decision. So I will extend it a little bit further. If you made a decision to get the COVID vaccine or not, based on a doctor's assessment who personally knows you and personally reviews your medical history, then I would say that was also a good decision, right? I will extend it that far. But if you made the decision based on the group, and we're going to talk about the group after the intermission here, if you made a decision based on the group, what people said you should do. Oh, Dr. Fauci said I should get it. Well, Dr. Fauci has never seen you. He doesn't know if there are extenuating circumstances that suggest you should or should not take it. So I had a friend, he's got, I believe, Crohn's disease, and he has to be very careful with all vaccines. And so his doctor was like, yeah, for you, don't take the COVID vaccine. Same as he was given advice on other vaccines, right? Like, let's limit it. Let's limit it to where it's absolutely necessary, because it could be a problem for you. And there are people for which they could not take it based on a doctor assessment, a doctor's recommendation. So I wanted to discuss this because I think it's poor form. And I think we're not doing ourselves any favor to sit there and argue about the results. Okay. Because if you took the COVID vaccine and I didn't, and we're both now still healthy as a horse, well, who was right? Well, maybe both. Maybe neither of us. Based on how did we arrive at the decision to choose to not take the vaccine or to take the vaccine? Now, I will say as an aside, after the fact, after, things started dying down and maybe you might call it the social tables turned, I noticed that a lot of my peers were mocking, and they were like, every time somebody died, they would be like, "Oh, did they take the vaccine? They probably died of cancer because they got turbo cancer, or they died because of whatever, the COVID, the effects of the vaccine, caused this problem, So it was just this constant barrage. One, I think that's pretty crappy to do. I mean, think about it. Like, if people die, should you really? It's almost dancing on their grave to be like, "Aha, you took the COVID vaccine, so therefore you died." It's kind of a crappy thing to do. And I didn't engage in that, nor did I engage in making fun of people who took the vaccine for whatever reason. And why is that? I want you to think about something. Taking the COVID vaccine, is a medical decision. So one of the things that I look for is, did people treat the COVID vaccine like they did any other treatment or pharmaceutical? If they did, then there's a certain level of consistency, right or wrong. Because again, you can still be making bad decisions even if you do it repeatedly. So if your decision, you know, to take the COVID vaccine or not was based on a doctor recommendation, then I would say that still puts you potentially, and we could argue and say, is it a good decision? Is it a bad decision? But I would say it probably puts you in the same position to be a, should I say good decision? I don't know if I want to say good. Let me think. Mm, we'll call it decent. We'll call it a decent decision. Okay. We're not going to call it good, because I still think that a good decision would be that you evaluate based on your risk and who you are. And this, before COVID, doctors would suggest that you do that. They would say, "Hey, go get a second opinion. That's great. Like, that's a good idea. You should get a second opinion. You should evaluate it. You at the end of the day are going to be the one that's going to either suffer from the mistake or benefit from the good decision." So if I go into the doctor and I'm like, "Hey, I've got this thing," and he's like, "Ooh, you need an antibiotic," and I don't take it. Okay. Well, I might have to suffer for not taking it. But maybe if I do take it, then I don't suffer, right? Like I get things clear up, I can move on about my life. So I think it's very interesting to talk about the decision making process, but I think a lot of people are doing it wrong. At the end of the day, I think the best decision will be one that you made based on your understanding of all available information at the time. You can say second best or good or decent, however you want to phrase it, would be, "Hey, am I making a decision based on somebody that personally knows me?" Right? If you made it just because Dr. Fauci said so, or President Biden implored you to do it, then I think you made a bad decision. Now, that you could still have a good outcome, and that's okay, but I think you made a bad decision in that particular sense. But I'm willing to give it to you if you made it similar to how you make any other decisions. Oh, you go to the doctor makes a recommendation, you follow the doctor's recommendation. Okay, fair enough. That's very common. But at least that person knows you and they've taken time to evaluate and say, based on your current health situation here and based on my knowledge of human health, here is the recommendation that I am giving you. Okay. So I think it's fair to say that either way. Okay. And but I think if you want to make the best decision, you will seek out a doctor, you will get their perspective, and then you will also evaluate the information for yourself. Now, here's the catch. This is the funny part, because a lot of people, they really were like, "Oh, you chose not to. You're making a bad decision. You should follow, even if your doctor told you to take it." But the fun part is that prior to COVID, it's extreme. You can look up the data. It's crazy common for people to get a second opinion or to disagree with the doctor. In fact, most of you have probably met somebody prior to 2020 who said, "I went to the doctor and I complained about this, and that doctor misdiagnosed me. And I felt like something wasn't right. So I went and got a second opinion because I believe that they got it wrong." And so then they go and get a second opinion, and then they find out, "Oh, actually, this other doctor, they got it right. They recognize that, nope, you have, The first doctor says, you have issue A. The second doctor says, and you're questioning that. The second doctor says, no, you have issue B, actually. And then you pursue it and you find out, yep, I really do have issue B. And so it was actually acceptable socially to question the doctor who even saw you in the first place. Let me give you a personal example. Back in 2014, somewhere around there, 2013, 2014, somewhere around there, I um, I noticed something really weird. For most of my life that I can recall, I had been able to hear my right eye move inside my head. Now you might go, "What? That's crazy." So think of it like this: imagine you put on some earbuds that have that are wired, okay? And imagine that you take the wire and you rub the wire. That sound that you hear in your ear, that's what it would sound like to me when I would just move my eye. It would just sound just like that. And I thought it was normal for the longest time. I never even thought twice about it. But then I was just casually reading and I came across something called semicircular canal dehiscence. And I was like, I was reading about this and I was like, wow, that's weird. Like, yeah, I experienced that. And I experienced that too. And I experienced that. And I was like, oh my God, no, this is a rare disease or a rare disorder. There's no way. And then as I'm reading more and I'm like, I really think I might have this. So I went to a regular doctor and I said, hey, I have this experience and, I have constant tinnitus and I have this and I have this and I have this. And I'm like, is it possible I have this disorder? And he dismissed it. And he was like, look, if you're having trouble thinking or reading because you have this tinnitus, just turn the radio up. And I was like, that's a pretty crappy decision. Like our response, like your official doctor, your prescription is turn the radio up. That's a hell of a prescription. So I decided I didn't like him. So I went to another doctor. I ended up going to an ENT. And the ENT, he evaluated me and he goes, honestly, he goes, I don't really see it. He goes, but you are presenting this is what he said. Exactly. He said, you're presenting an interesting constellation of symptoms. So I'm going to send you to go and get a CAT scan. Was it a CAT scan? Yeah, it was a CAT scan. He's like, I'm going to send you to get a CAT scan. I'm like, okay. So go ahead and have the CAT scan. And I go back to the ENT and he goes, all right. He goes, I don't see it on the CAT scan, but the the radiologist does. They say that you have it on both sides, both ears. This is an inner ear disorder, and I'll describe what it is in a minute. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, he goes, I don't treat that. He goes, and I'm going to defer to the radiologist. He goes, so therefore, he goes, I'm going to send you to what do they call it? A neuro-otologist. So I'm like, okay. So I get referred to a neuro-otologist. Now, this is a guy that specifically, like, one of the things that he treats is SSCD, semicircular, SSCD. I always get the acronym incorrect, but it's semicircular canal dehiscence. And so I go to him. And by this time, I had been researching, and I found a community, an online community, and these of people that had this same disorder, and they're explaining all the things that they've learned about it. They explain some of the best doctors to go to and whatnot. So I'm like, okay, so I have now this body of information in my head about what's going on in my head. So then I go to this neuro-otologist, and he looks at all the evidence and he's like, yeah, he goes, I confirm you have this disorder bilaterally. You have it on the left and on the right. And he said, here's my recommendation. He goes, I recommend you have this procedure. And then I was like, well, based on the evidence and everything that I'm reading, I think I want a second opinion. Okay. And so now what is the second opinion about? So in your ear, you have those 3 canals. You might remember it. I'm going to try to put it up. I can't do it with my fingers, but imagine you got like 3 canals. Okay. The top one that goes at the very top, because there's like one that goes over the top, and then there's 2, I think they're to the side or whatever. And there's fluid going in those. And these help keep you upright. These are the ones where wherever the fluid is, your brain gets a signal and says, okay, this is the position that the body's in. This is what we need to do to keep you upright. So if I'm standing and I'm walking, then that fluid is giving a certain motion. And this allows me to, allows my brain to interpret those signals and say, okay, he's moving, he's walking forward, or he's walking to the side. And so then it allows the brain to send signals to all the different body parts to say, okay, this is how we're going to keep you upright. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to basically go in and plug up one of those, the top one, because what SSCD is, it is a small little hole in the cranium, in between the vestibular system and the brain. It's a tiny, tiny little hole. Okay, and because of that hole, it causes a lot of problem. It causes a lot of issues. I can't really go into the details, but it causes a lot of issues with how the brain receives signals, and so it gets a lot of confusing signals. And so the idea is like you plug this up, and then you no longer have this you don't have this problem of these signals. And so I was like, man, I don't know. That just doesn't seem right. And I can't remember what my rationale was, but I was like, I'm gonna get a second opinion. Well, guess what? Nobody was like, dude, you can't get a second opinion. You're not an expert. Like nobody said that. They were like, oh yeah, you should get a second opinion. Doctors will tell you to get a second opinion, because they'll tell you, I'm not always correct. I will make a clinical assessment based on my understanding of the information. And it's perhaps I get it right, perhaps I get it wrong. Obviously, yeah, I assume that they get it right more often than not, but that's the whole point of a second opinion. So through this community, I hear about this doctor in Louisiana. He is the doctor for this particular disorder. He has written about it. He has given talks about it at medical communities. Like he is considered the go-to for this particular disorder. So I'm like, all right, let me go to this guy. So I reach out. I end up going to him. He says, I agree with you. Now, the reason that he agreed with me was different. Like I didn't quite get the rationale right, the medical purpose right, but he agreed. He goes, I don't think it's a good idea. His rationale was relatively simple. He said, you have 6 canals, 3 on each side, right, that have the fluid flowing in. He goes, but you also have this issue bilaterally. He goes, so if it's the case that you need to plug up the other one, he goes, then you would actually end up having 1/3 of your canals plugged up. He's like, I don't think that's a good. And he gave me the rationale behind it, but he's like, I think that's a bad way. That would not be in your best interest. So I'm like, okay. So, and then he explains why he thinks the surgery is going to be more beneficial, so on and so forth. So he ended up doing the surgery by basically cutting a hole in my head, going in, lifting up my brain, and then spackling the hole. That's basically what he did. But this all came about through the decision-making process, through evaluating information. And as I acquired more and more information, I made different decisions along the way. And in some cases, I got it wrong. So for instance, the reason that I wanted a second opinion, that wasn't as good as his reason for saying, okay, you're right in getting a second opinion, and you're right in that this is not the procedure that's best for you, but you're not necessarily correct in the rationale why. Here is the reason. Here is the better reason why. So I say all of that just to point out that when it comes to a vaccine or any procedure, the reality is each person has to make a decision that's best for them. The more information that you can acquire, the better off your decision will be. The more you make a decision based on evidence and information, the more likely that you will be able to look back and say, that was a good decision. So if there's no information available to you, then you're kind of stuck and you're going to have to make it on whatever is available. Sometimes there won't be much. Sometimes there will be more. If you make it based on the group or based on what somebody who doesn't even know you says, then it's likely to be a bad decision. If you make it in contradiction to all available information, so go back to the whole swimming hole, where if you're like, all right, it's cool to get hammered and go swimming. Well, all the body of evidence says that's a bad idea. And here's why. So even if you decide to do that against, contrary to all available evidence that says bad decision, don't do this, even if you come out of it unharmed, you still made a bad decision. So decision making is about information. It's about evaluating it, based on your circumstances, who you are, and what available information that you have. You can make good decisions even on thin amounts of evidence, thin amounts of information, right? You can still do that. It's possible, but you have to defer. You have to at least go look into it. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea about what resulting is, what it's not. Okay. You do not want a result. And we're naturally inclined, as Annie Duke says, we're naturally inclined to base our decisions on the result. So after the commercial break here, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about, okay, well, what about making a decision based on what the group is doing? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, let's get to some comments in here. And then we'll come back and we'll break this down even a little bit further. So let's see here. John says, sounds like an interesting discussion topic. I try to make decisions on what is going to be interesting and what is not, right? And I don't always get it right. A lot of my decision is based on, how deep do I got to research this information? Like if I'm going to have to spend, 30 hours researching something, it's probably not going to make it to a podcast episode. But if I have to only spend like maybe a couple of hours researching it, or I can draw upon information that, I've acquired over time, then that makes it easier. But I tell you what, if you guys, the audience, have ideas, throw them in the chat. Say, man, I'd love you to talk about this. If you see a bill that you're interested in that you'd like me to try to, evaluate and break down, let me know. You can also send me an email. You can find me on social media. The best place to find me is going to be X, Twitter. You can go to Liberty Dad Pod and you can just be like, hey, DL, I'd love to see an episode on this. You can also go to Liberty Dad on Facebook and you could post there and say, same thing. I'd love to have a topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, right? You can also send me an email, libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. I'm interested in, checking out topics. Maybe I'll do it. If you send me a topic, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. It just depends on, do I believe that I can competently talk about that particular topic or not? Like if you ask me like, hey, DL, can you give me a good breakdown of the issue over in the Middle East? I'm not really going to be your guy on that, just because there's a wealth of information that I simply don't have. And in that case, for the libertarian perspective, I'm going to defer you to like, say, Dave Smith or Scott Horton, who these guys have been talking about this for like over a decade, and they have over a decade's worth of knowledge that they can contribute to the topic. So it just depends. But yeah, throw these things out there. Let me know. I'm always interested. I would also do, if you see a video that you'd like me to review, that can end up on the list. So yeah, if you're interested in something, let me know. Let's see what else. Who doesn't like a retro arcade game? I know, right? It's a lot of fun, except for the part where a 6-year-old is beating you and then like, yeah, I just beat you. And you're like, I see you, boy. I got something for you as soon as we get over to this game over here. And then I trash talked him. Again, it was all respectful. We're not rude or anything. John says Ryu is my character of choice in Street Fighter 2. My choice in Mortal Kombat was Johnny Cage. I never was good at Mortal Kombat. So like I just picked whatever and just mashed buttons. I was never really good at it. Let's see. Let's see what else we got in here. Yes, here's another example. Best example would be that you get drunk, drive home, and because you didn't get into an accident or hurt someone, it was a good idea. Correct. Right? It just simply is not the case that getting drunk and driving is a good decision under any circumstances. For a variety of reasons. One, you're slower at your decision-making process. You can't respond as quickly, so on and so forth, right? You make poor decisions, because you're like, oh, this will be fine. Yeah. I mean, you're already making a poor decision getting in the vehicle. And then every decision after that is just a contributing bad decision. So you can't look back and go, I made it home fine. I was fine. It's no big deal. No, it was a big deal. It was a bad idea. You got lucky. People don't understand the difference between I got lucky and I made a good decision. And we need to, because how else, we have to make decisions all day, every day. And so the best thing that we can do for ourselves is learn to make good decisions, or learn when a decision that we made was either made on bad information or was just simply a bad decision in the first place. Let's see here. Keith says, I hear the more and more accurate info you have, the better you're able to make a decision that will get you the desired result. You cannot use the results. Let's see here. Hold on. You cannot result to judge your decision quality. You can use the feedback to try and make a better decision next time. Yes. So if you look back and you're like, oh, I made a poor decision because I really didn't have the evidence that I thought I had. That's feedback. And now you can use that and incorporate it. And so that going forward, you make better decisions. The idea being that as you make more decisions, you learn to make better and better ones. That's the goal. And so if you're 40 or 50 years old, you should, in theory, have learned to make better decisions. Doesn't mean you always will. We're human. We're prone to failure, but that's the process under which you're going to want to make these decisions. All right, folks, let's go to a quick break here, and then we'll be right back, and we will talk about what about the group. So let's do that. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, so now let's talk about group decisions. Like what happens when the group is making a decision and then you have to decide, is the group making a good one? This would fall within the territory of like the wisdom of the crowd. And so it's this idea that like, hey, if the group has made this decision, then you have all these independent voices that are collectively coming together and maybe hashing out a decision or an idea and then coming to a conclusion. And so therefore, it must be a good idea or a bad idea based on what the group says. Well, again, we go back to Annie Duke, not so much. So here's a clip from her with Reason Magazine. By the way, you can find the clips that I'm playing in the show notes if you want to see the fuller context. So here is this clip of Annie Duke, and she talks about the group. And so let's see here. This one right here.
I think that we generally think that group decision making is better than individual decision making.
So this is the wisdom of the crowd type of stuff.
Yeah, the wisdom of the crowd kind of thing. So just get a group together, make decisions together, you'll all be better off. And that's actually not true. It depends on something about the group. And it's exactly what you just said. Does the group have a confirmatory thinking style or an exploratory thinking style? So a confirmatory thinking style is that we're all affirming each other's beliefs, right? That's sort of what we generally think of as an echo chamber. And by the way, it's where we like to be. So the problem is that groups tend to drift off into this confirmatory style. What we'd really like to promote is an exploratory style. So we can think of the difference between the group trying to be right versus the group trying to be accurate. A group that's goal is to be right, this is going to be one with a confirmatory style, is their goal is to affirm that the beliefs that they have are right. That's the goal. In other words, whatever I believed before, I would like to know that that was the right thing to believe. A group whose goal is accuracy is actually going to have a very different goal in mind, which is it's not about making sure that my priors, that whatever I believed before is right, but making sure that the things that I believe are as good a representation of the objective truth as possible. So it sounds a little like, well, what's the difference between right and accurate? But it's a really, really deep distinction. And once you have a group who's committed to accuracy, now you naturally are going to develop an exploratory thought style. Because in order to have accurate beliefs, you have to be hungry for information. And what kind of information do you have to be particularly hungry for?
Okay. So hopefully you understood the gist there. You have two broad ways of thinking about the group. They're going to be confirmatory. That's your echo chamber. They just want to be right. And then you have exploratory. These are the folks that want to be accurate, which means their perspective may change. They may start out in a particular place, and then through the process of acquiring more and more information, they say, oh, turns out this is where we need to be. And it's also possible that they could gather more and more information and simply confirm and say, yes, as we go forward and we acquire more information, we're finding that this information actually confirms our initial assessment, which is possible. Because if you happen to be right in the first place, well, then as more evidence comes forward, objectively correct, then as more evidence comes forward, that evidence should lead you to confirming. So it's a little confusing, right? Because you can still confirm your initial assessment under the exploratory crowd. You always will confirm it under the confirmatory because that's what they're doing. Now, let me put this into a different context. Growing up in the 90s, I was an evangelical in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Now, I'm not dumping on Christian folk, okay? It's not what I'm doing. But there was this argument over evolution versus intelligent design. And one of the things that I found was interesting was like a lot of the people on the evolution side, they would be like, well, all the facts and evidence align with us. And then the intelligent design side would say, well, there's a lot of facts and evidence, but you're missing some. And so here's some other evidence that suggests something different. But here was the big problem. And I'm actually not going to beat up on the Christians. I'm going to beat up on the atheists. And it was funny because I observed this confirmatory, exploratory, like say divide, if you will, years ago. I didn't have the words to describe it. I couldn't articulate it, but I observed it, and I observed it in this particular context where I would notice that if an evangelical were to come out and say, well, this is why intelligent design is, more accurate than say evolution, a lot of your people that fell on the evolution side would go, oh yeah, well, that's been debunked. That's been debunked. Here's information you're missing. And so they would put out all this information and they were very happy to point out where the Christian got it wrong. And sometimes they did get it wrong, right? Like, and I'm not taking a stand particularly on either side. I'm just saying sometimes the Christian folk, their argument was not a good argument. Whether they ultimately were right or wrong, sometimes their argument was a poor argument. But what I noticed is that actually sometimes a lot of people who fell on the side of evolution, they were also incorrect because I remember debating some of them. And I remember sometimes I would correct people and they would say, well, evolution, blah, blah, blah. And they would make some sort of comment. And I would say, well, that's actually not even true according to your own side. Like you actually have got evolution incorrect. You don't even understand your own position, right? Like if I were an evolutionist, I would still be critiquing you and saying you have the right answer, but for the wrong reasons, right? If I were an evolutionist at the time. And it was very interesting because I noticed that nobody was correcting them. Like the evolutionists were happy to correct the intelligent design folk, but they kind of gave their side a pass so long as their side was giving the right answer, not the right reason for the answer, not the right underlying facts. And so looking back, I realized that intelligent design folk, the Christians, and the atheists who are the evolutionists, many of them in the groups were confirmatory. They were not exploratory. Now, there were many on both sides who were exploratory, and they would say, okay, let me evaluate that information. Let me go dig in. Let me see, and let me, let me see if this argument's good. Let me see if this information is quality, so on and so forth. And so there was some of that. But looking back, there was a large amount of people on both sides who literally just wanted to confirm what they believe. And you might have guessed This happens still to this day, not only in those areas, but in many other areas, right? This is why people will go and they'll dig up information. You get this confirmation bias. They believe in a topic, hey, I've staked my position on any given topic right here. And then they go find information to support that, right? That's confirmation bias. But then what happens is many of the group that also agree with them will kind of let it slide. They don't correct them and say, okay, we also agree with your conclusion, but you're getting it wrong as to why the conclusion is correct. And this is pick a topic, any topic, you will see this. And once you see it, as the internet meme goes, you can't unsee it. You'll be like, oh my goodness, like these people are just going along with the group and the group is okay with this. And that's because we largely exist in this echo chamber. And as Annie Duke pointed out, this is where we feel most comfortable because the exploratory group is, this would be your true scientist. These are the scientists who are going to be like, I'm going to follow the information wherever it leads. And even if I tightly hold this view, if the evidence tells me otherwise, I have to move away from it. And that's a very counterintuitive thing for humans. And I'm not suggesting like I'm not human, but I mean like for us as people, that is a very natural thing. Who wants to be wrong? It could be embarrassing, right? So ultimately, how do we get around this? How do we deal with this factor? Well, the first and foremost is that we try to make our decisions based on, a proper assessment of the available information, right? And then when we look back, we evaluate our decision based on how did we make the decision? Not does today's information confirm that my decision was correct? Because you can make a decision on Monday and not take a look at any of the available information. You can just make a decision, and you can find out Friday that you made a good decision. But you could find out Friday that you made a good decision based on information that that totally contradicts the rationale that you made it for in the first place. Does that make sense? Like I hope that doesn't sound confusing, but you could actually on Friday look back and go, actually, I'm glad I made that decision, but man, the reason I made that decision, whew, that was bad. That was not a good way to make that decision. Boy, did I get lucky, right? And so I think when we're making decisions, that's how we want to approach it. We want to approach it with this critical eye. What information do I have? Right. And there is some level of herd, the herd, if you will, the group can make a good decision. Right. This is the nature of, like, say, if you go on X, they have the notes, the community notes that can be applied. And so that's like the community evaluating something that you've said. And it doesn't always get it right because the crowd, the group is not always correct. I mean, think about it. If you look back, just like say the atheist versus the Christian divide, one of them is right. One of them is not. Okay. Like the same thing with COVID. One of them was right. One of them was not. But you have to consider, where are we? How are the decisions being made? What is the information available to me? So for me, when I look back fondly about the decision that I made to not get vaccinated. Not because look at me now, because I look back and I say, I evaluated the available evidence to me as best I could at the time. And the evidence at the time said this. And as it turned out, future information only reinforced that the information that I had was accurate in the first place. It could be the case that I had learned today in 2025 that all the information that I was looking at to make my decision turned out to be incorrect. But I would still look, and so I could look back and go, man, I got it wrong, but I got it wrong for good reasons. So, and I think this is something that we don't really recognize. Think of it this way. You have a decision making, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like here's the decision, true, false, blah, blah, blah. And there's like 4 outcomes. So you can, on any given decision, you can make a good decision, you can make a bad decision. You can be correct or you can be incorrect. So you can be correct and have made a good decision, or you could be correct and have made a bad decision. You could also be incorrect and have made a good decision, and you could be incorrect and have made a bad decision. All of those 4 possibilities are available to you. Where society tends to be is that you could argue that they tend to fall into one of 2 situations. They either make a good decision or a bad decision based on good information, or good evaluation of the information, or bad evaluation of the information. So they made it for a good rationale or bad rationale, right? That's generally where we are. When we look back, we're like, oh, I made a good decision or a bad decision, but it was based on one of these 2 criteria. And I think that more often than not, we're actually not making good decisions. We're just either getting good results or bad results. That's where I think we fall in. So we fall in one of those 2 categories. It's not that we're making good decisions based on the information. It's that we're making bad decisions, but we end up evaluating the good or the bad outcome. So hopefully that enlightens you a little bit. And as you go forward and you're arguing over the COVID vaccine and whether or not this or that should have happened, if somebody throws at you and says, oh, yeah, well, this airplane shows that you're incorrect. Well, it depends. It depends on what you're saying. If you're going, nobody regrets not getting the vaccine, that's not entirely correct, for starters. And the regret should be based on what information did you have. I don't regret it, not because of the outcome. I don't regret it because I look back and I say, I made a good decision based on the available information that I had to me at the time. And as we look back, I think it's fair now to look back and say, there was more information to evaluate our decisions than people were presenting at the time. Because I remember I would say like, oh, well, I'm not in a risk category. And people are like, you don't know that. You're not an epidemiologist. You're not a this, you're not a that. And I'm like, no, but I can read data. I can look at it and I can look at a chart of who's dying and who's not. And I can be like, wow, there's a distinct difference here. Once you get over, I think the age was like somewhere around 55, 60. Once you get over that age, your risk suddenly goes up tremendously. And then I think once you get over, I think it was like somewhere between 70 and 75, your risk dramatically went up. Again, just based on age. Part of that is because you tend to have more comorbidities at that time, right? But also part of that is just because you're not as healthy as you used to be. You're not as resilient to disease and the things around you as you. I mean, think about it. If you're 80 and you fall down, that could be the end, right? Like it's but if I fall down at 47, like just literally trip over something and fall down on the concrete, I'm probably going to get up and move along and not have any issues, right? But if I'm 80 and I fall down, that could be a death sentence, right? Because you're simply more at risk for the world around you as you get older. So, hopefully this made sense. Hopefully this was a good topic to kind of get back into the swing of things. Hopefully you're more enlightened, and hopefully when you go out and you debate people about whether or not, getting the vaccine was a good call, hopefully now you are a little bit better debater and we can spread a little bit more knowledge on how do we make decisions, because mark my words, you will have another decision to make that's very much along the same lines. We may not have another pandemic in my lifetime. Hopefully we don't. But if we do, hopefully this episode and just learning to evaluate information will put you in a better place to make an even better decision the next time around, or for whatever other issue may arise. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be faced with decision after decision after decision. And we all want to make the best decision. So how do we do that? Well, we acknowledge that decisions can be made poorly, even if we have a good outcome. So we have to constantly be vigilant, constantly look for information available to us to the best of our ability. I'm not expecting you to necessarily read through, 14 studies and evaluate all the math. You don't have to do all that. I didn't do all that. Not necessarily. There weren't studies to evaluate. What I did was I just looked at the charts and I said, all right, who's dying? What do we know about them? Okay, well, they who are dying are not me in terms of health. My health is in a far different place. So therefore, that's how I made my decision. And turns out it was a good way to do it. All right, let's get to some comments here, some end comments, and then we'll head on out for the day. Glad you guys are joining me. Let's see here. I think we're good on those socials. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, okay. Doesn't look like there's any more comments. So we're just going to head on out. I'm just going to end the show, guys. I'm still working on creating a better outro. I've got to update a few things and I just haven't had a chance because I enjoyed my weekend. I really did. It was great. It was so wonderful to just, I don't know how many times I said this last weekend. We were trying to make a decision. I was like, whatever works for me. I'm on vacation. Like, whatever. I got nowhere to be, nothing to do. Let's do it. So with that, have a good one, folks. I will see you tonight at 7:30. Again, the show will be part public, part premium. So if you're not a premium member, there's still time for you to sign up for Rumble if you so choose. If not, just sign up for Rumble, jump in the chat, say hello. Help me get to that end goal. But for now, I will be seeing you guys.